So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the third in our series on financial resilience. Thank you so much for joining us. Some of you have been with us from the beginning. I really want to thank those of you for continuing to support us. It's been really heartening for us. It's really encouraging us, to do this. So I'm just going to share my screen very quickly. Yes, just do this. So we're starting off with the scripture that we always start off with, which is from Ecclesiastes 7, verse 12. For the protection of wisdom is like the protection of money, and the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of him who has it. And so just to remind you that we are talking about financial resilience, which is, as a reminder, the ability to withstand and recover from a temporary financial hardship and disruptions. It is a long-term, ongoing and sustainable process that can be nurtured and planned for. And actually today, we are speaking about a really important aspect of financial resilience, which is legacy planning. So it's not just about resilience for ourselves, but also thinking about resilience for future generations. And I am now going to introduce the poll, which we always start off with a poll. So can we put the poll up? Hang on, let me just, can everyone see the poll? So the poll question is, what is legacy planning? And you have 4 multiple choice answers. Is legacy planning writing your will and lasting power of attorney? Or is legacy planning family history handed down to the next generation? Or is it planning for your inheritance tax? Or is it preserving and transferring wealth to future generations? So what is legacy planning? Just waiting for everyone to vote. Right, so I'm going to look at the results of this poll, and 17, we've only got 2 answers actually. So people certainly don't think legacy planning is family history handed down to the next generation or inheritance tax planning, but 17% of you think that legacy planning is writing your will and lasting power of attorney, but a whopping 83% think that legacy planning is preserving and transferring wealth to future generations. And actually, I think that's the right answer, isn't it, David?
I'm not sure.
Oh, really? We're having a problem tonight then if you're not sure.
I believe it probably is. If the majority says it is,
then it is.
Because we vote for Brexit and the majority are right. We got Boris, so probably majority is right. No, it is the right answer. Preserving and transferring to future generations.
Wonderful. So I'm now going to hand over to David Frederick. David, if you recall, David wasn't able to be with us last week, but he's back with us this week. And David is actually an expert in this area. This is really what he does. So we're going to listen to David for the next 10 to 15 minutes or so. And David's going to explain all about legacy planning. And then we're going to go into our normal sort of conversation and question and answer session. So David, it's over to you.
Thank you, Elaine. Good evening, everybody. Session on legacy planning. Legacy planning is quite interesting, really, because it's often misunderstood and it's confused with other things as well, too. And I think for those of you who have green fingers or who are in touch with the land, you might want to see legacy planning in a agricultural kind of way. It's about planting seeds in the garden, but you don't always get to see the harvest. So whenever you plant tomatoes or other crops, you often see your products come up. But legacy planning often you're planting something, but you don't see it. Why? Because legacy planning is about passing things on, and it's passing things on to the next generation and beyond. So it's about passing assets, wealth, and good principles and values onto future generations. So legacy planning is all about passing on. And the start of the process, I tell people, is often building a solid and firm foundation. And it reminds me really of one of my many famous verses from the Bible, Proverbs 22, about training the children right, and they will never depart from the path and so forth, or they'll return to it later on. That's legacy planning. Or as the songwriter says, I believe the children are our future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. The key thing in both of those extracts is education, and legacy planning starts with what I think one of the most important things. It's about teaching your children and those around you about personal finance and financial education, if nothing else. Or you can go one step backwards, as I see it, and teach and investing in your children's education, because education investment is perhaps the biggest legacy you can pass on to future generations. So legacy planning is part of what I call a triumphant. The first part is financial planning. And financial planning, I like to see, is about planning for the current generation, making sure you know what comes in, what goes out, you can pay your bills, as we saw last week, making sure you manage your credit score, etc. Then we move on from financial planning to the popular essence of planning, estate planning. And estate planning is often about passing on to the next generation. And I think that's where question one in the poll was about the will and lasting power of attorney. But the maturity of the planning process is all about legacy planning. Let's passing it on, get down the line. And we see so many examples of this around us in society. Sadly, I think we don't see enough of that within our community. Okay, or we do see some things passed on, but they're not always things you'll call assets on your balance sheet. Okay, and they're not always things we take great pride in. Yeah, so legacy planning starts off, I think, from having a plan. And you need to have 3 plans: a financial plan for now, an estate plan for the next generation, but bigger than that, you need to have a legacy plan for future generations. That's what it's all about. Underpinning all of that is the education piece. You educate your children and your loved ones, those near and close to you, educate them. Then also you then move into the financial education piece, because as I keep saying to people, financial problem is not the issue, it's the actual symptom. The issue really is the lack of, or the miseducation in finances, and we see it every day around. And we need to also, as part of the education process, understand the language of finances as well too, so we know what we're going to do in legacy. What legacy for? A key part, if I may say, about the education piece is making sure we explain to our loved ones and our family what's it all about, because too often through generations assets are lost, are wasted, because we don't pass on, we don't teach people about the essence, the importance of assets. Give you a sad example. A great colleague of mine I know a young man who inherited, that's in one generation, a property with no mortgage, 3-story house in W9 in Maida Vale. Today, one flat rents for $650,000, and there's 3 flats in that property, plus also a 1-bedroom flat. And inside 7 years, the whole lot was lost. Yep, I would say given away. Yep, was lost. Because people don't understand how you acquire assets and how you hang on to assets and how you grow assets, it's often wasted. And there's a myth or a belief in some people that we must sell, sell, sell. I'm not sure why people must be keen to sell. And we've seen in the likes of the London Borough of Hackney, London Borough of Lambeth, London Borough of Lewisham, etc., the experiences of people who bought cheap and were keen to sell rather than pass on. Yep. We've seen what's happened. Now, people talk about gentrification. We can't live in London and so forth. We've got to ask ourselves, yep, are we thinking longer term? How many times do we see in households assets come up for renewal or growth? We said, oh, let's just sell it. Let's take the cash. Well, cash is great, but cash and assets are 2 different things. The poor man walks around with cash in his pockets every time. The rich man can't afford to walk around with cash in his pockets. So let's understand the process of legacy, what legacy is about. Other aspects of legacy building and legacy transfer onto generational wealth, we may come to that later on this afternoon or this evening. Think about what are we doing in terms of building empires and businesses, which we then can pass on. And for that, I always tell people who ask me about a business structure, and they ask me about sole trader and a limited company. And I say to people, I don't see sole trader as being all that. Why? Because when you die, it dies with you. There's no thought in that process at all. I'm simple that way. If you want to build something, build a company. Or in the US, build an S corporation, have shares and pass it on. It's all about passing on next generation down the line. Think about investing in assets such as perhaps property, real estate, land. One really sad, tragic thing is lots of people in the UK of our generation, of our background, come from families that has owned land overseas. However, over time, it gets dissipated. Prime example of that is a place like Montserrat, which is now an ecological garden and so forth. Yep, people in their land have been separated because we often don't understand the value of the land as well too. Investment in perhaps equity, building a portfolio for the future we can then pass on. If you really want to start passing things on, one thing you must always do, write a will. I'm not fussed what you might think about dying if you write a will. That's your problem. If you think writing a will makes you die, you're not ready for legacy planning as yet. And the final part of the structure, I think, in legacy planning is thinking about creating trusts. Because why? A trust have a lifespan of at least 125 years. How many of you will be around 125 years. Hopefully, at least one of us will be. Yet, but 125 years and on and on. And we've seen in modern society the beauty of trust. You ask any child who's had a benefit of a trust fund how it's quite different from having to scratch around to survive and so forth in that respect. So legacy planning is a holistic process. I know it's talked about a lot nowadays by people about financial empowerment. It's great talking about it, but it's about a coherent, structured plan to achieve something. And the starting point is making sure your financial planning where you are today, this generation, is solid and you can build up, because legacy planning is like the roof on the house. And we know if the roof goes up and the foundation is not solid or it's on sand, what will happen? Okay, it'll come tumbling down faster than quicksand. So that, in essence, is the journey, the importance of legacy planning. Yeah, it's not something you talk about. It's a lifetime process with step by step by step. And sadly, it's not like overnight success that people talk about nowadays. It takes time. Yep. The day you plant the seed is never the day you reap the harvest. I think, Elaine, that's where I want to park it for now on legacy planning, because I think I've packed quite a few points in there. I think at least 9 points on how to build legacy planning and passing on a thing called generational wealth to actually whet people's appetite, to get their hearts pumping and get them all emotionally excited and so forth. You know me, I'm always excited.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, David. That was, that was really important stuff. And I've got some questions for you. So everyone, for the audience, we're now going into this let's talk about it phase of our work. David and I are going to kick off by having a conversation. I'm going to ask David some questions about his presentation, just so that he can expand on some of the things he said. But this is where we would really like you to engage. So please use the chat and put your questions in the chat. And we can put those questions to David. Marcia is watching the chat and she'll tell us what's there if I miss it. But we're going to be doing this now for the next 25 minutes or so. David, lots of stuff actually from there. But I just want to take you back to what you said about, we're all talking about legacy planning at the moment, because we are. You know, we've seen it in lots of places. People have started talking about it, and we've been seeing about how we've been talking about how important it is for Black communities, especially important in Black communities. Can you tell me why you think it's really important for our communities to be to really be taking legacy planning seriously?
Well, I think what I'll use is news this morning on BBC about, in the States, for the first time since Second World War, the life expectancy in the States has dropped by 2 years, but it's dropped by the Afro-American by 3 years. And the question was, COVID isn't a race thing. COVID is a thing based upon location. If we jump back to the UK, and I will say the reason why it's important for our communities is because often we don't understand that which we hold, like properties in Lambeth, Brixton and so forth. We're keen to sell and rush back somewhere else, then come back empty-handed. But also as well, for our communities, for generations to come and so forth, wouldn't it be nice to start at a higher level rather than always having to start at below ground zero? I know poverty and struggle builds character, but at some point, okay, we must end at level 1, then go to level 2 and 3, rather than each generation starting below ground zero. Yeah,
Yeah.
It'll be nice for us to say, okay, that's a start. Now let's pass the baton on to go further in the race for our community. We often and usually are the receivers of the least of everything. Our churches have the least resources. We struggle the most. We're always collecting for the new roof, yep, the new floor, whatever, and so forth. However, nobody ever thinks about when they're planning their future finances to bequeath any money to the church. The same church who helps us in our needs as well too. I can say that. Yeah. So our community suffers the most and has the least, but we have the potential at each stage to pass things on, but we don't. I mean,
Yeah.
look at Brixton Hackney and Peckham, how it's been transformed. Okay.
Do you know, David, you said something very interesting that just as a follow on from that, you talked about the church and how many of us bequeath money to the churches that we attend. And it's just really interesting to know that the Anglican churches in particular, a lot of their wealth has been made through people bequeathing and leaving a legacy for the church in their wealth as part of their legacy planning. And you know, so much of how they've been able to build in their wealth is relies on that. So that's really an important point. We've got some questions, Marcia. Have we got three questions, or are there more?
We've got some questions here. Good evening, everybody. So the first question somebody has asked, iPhone S, don't know what your name is. And the question is, where best could they learn about financial education?
The best place, I would say, in 2021, okay, rather than listening to me and me charging an arm and a leg, okay, I would direct most people to the PCU and their Money Wise program. Also, other than the PCU, places like ICANN, who does it as well too. Or for a simple fee, if anybody wants to do some reading, they want to buy a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Yeah, it can transform your thinking. Yeah, you need not have grandiose expenditure, but look around in your circles where you can go, and PCU does it for, I think, zero charge.
Free.
Same as I can too.
Free, yeah.
Yeah. But if you want to spend a bit of change, you can start off with going to the likes of buying Rich Dad, Poor Dad and growing from there. And the aim is to learn a bit every day in small chunk sizes. It doesn't matter where you're starting from, but at least you're learning day by day.
Okay. The next question, which is from Carol Cooper, which is, please explain the impact of inheritance tax on legacy planning.
Yeah. In a nutshell, inheritance tax is a tax people choose to pay. Full stop. It's a tax people pay for the lack of planning. Yeah. Income tax, you have to pay. The law says that. The more you earn, the more you must pay. However, inheritance tax, there are ways to reduce it down to almost zero. For example, I'll quote you three men I know of. The Duke of Westminster, Bruce Forsyth, and Ken Dodd. They're all dead, okay? Sadly. However, on their passing, their IHT was almost zero. And the Duke of Westminster was quite a wealthy man. However, there's people who died in E4 who paid taxes, IHT of £487,000. There's a young lady in S26 still recovering from paying £650,000 when a mum passed away. To me, those are large numbers. Inheritance tax is taxes people choose to pay for the lack of planning. Yep, they don't want to plan. That's my answer to that one. So inheritance tax eats away your legacy and gives money to those who don't care, like, or love you, away from those who do care, like, and miss you.
Okay.
Wow, that's profound, David. That's profound, really. You know, and must be a whole program we could do on inheritance tax. Remind me.
Okay, will do.
Definitely.
Okay, one last question, which is what kind of trusts are there? Well, actually, there's quite a few others. What kind of trusts are there, and what is the most beneficial to leave a legacy for with regards to one's children and grandchildren? And that's from Monica.
See, that's the kind of question I like, okay? See, before you think about trust, okay, you got to start asking yourself, what do you have? And my starting point in the whole process is, what's your ADHD, your aspiration, your dreams, your hopes, and your desires? Let's forget trusts. Yeah, and let's start, obviously, where are we? Yeah, okay. I think it's Kirk Franklin who says, we're at a crossroads. What do we do? And he says, hold on, keep the faith. Okay. Same as in legacy planning. We're at crossroads now. Let's hold on before we move and ask ourselves, what do we have and what we're trying to achieve? Because is your child a disabled child? Because there's trust for those. Are your children warring children? So you might have different trust for those as well too. So it depends wholly on what you're trying to achieve. So I would say to anybody, sit down with your planning team, because in planning for generational wealth, it's not just sitting down with your accountant or your lawyer and your financial advisor, it's sitting down with your professional team who are on the same page as you, who are going forward with you to build. So that's what you need to do. Yeah, there are a whole range of trusts out there. And remember, there are tax implications when you start a trust, during life of a trust, at the end of a trust. And often the tax word, people forget and they miss out, but there's tax involved, and they get surprised, disheartened, and disappointed when you say to them, well, what about the tax to start off with if it's more than 325,000? What, tax, Dave? Yes, tax, Dave. The Duke of Westminster, who I mentioned a little while ago, before passing, he paid £750,000 in tax advice to pass away with 0 IHT. He saved a few millions of pounds. I think that's a good investment. Some people won't pay £1 to save £5. We'll make choices.
Yeah.
Okay, one last question. Is it beneficial to buy investment properties as a limited company rather than as an individual?
I would say it depends on your tax position, but I would avoid giving the Google answer, which is easy and simple. I would say that kind of question, you need to sit down with the individual and understand their tax profile and where they want to go. I'm reluctant and loath to give comments to questions in that ilk, because I think it's lacking in professionalism. You need to look at the individual's whole profile rather than just give out Google-style answers. Hence why I never go on Google for answers. I see professional advisors.
Okay. There's some more questions, but Elaine, if you want to kind of continue and then we can come back.
We'll come back. Thanks, Marcy. If you just keep a note of them and we'll just go down, we'll ask the next question. So, David, you did mention generational wealth when you were discussing legacy planning. Can you just tell us exactly how generational wealth is linked, how generational wealth links to legacy planning?
Yeah, well, legacy planning is when you're planning for future generations, and it's the future generations that enjoys the generational wealth. Think it simply like companies, for example, okay? The Sainsbury's chain or the Tesco's chain or the accountancy firms change in the cities and so forth. We have 2 or 3 generations of firms. It's about, you put things in place so they go down the line so that future generations don't have to suffer the pain of previous generations, and they can start, hopefully, at a higher level than previous generations. So by putting in place a legacy plan, you helping the next generation. Give an example, okay? Got a young lady down in SC25, and she's just put her house in a trust. She can afford to, because her house is only valued at £280,000. Because unlike you guys down here, okay, she's not like you Londoners. She's like me, up from the north. She's got a house in, I think it's called Manchester, a place called Manchester, in the north where it rains.
Yes.
And what she's quite astute lady as well. She's missed out one generation. By that, she's put it house in trust, but then the main beneficiary isn't her daughter, but her granddaughter. So her granddaughter may need school fees in the future, may need money in the future, but then she has a start in life much better than she did.
Yes.
You see, and her experience coming to the UK, as she's told me many times, and having to struggle, whatever, okay, made her realize there must be another way of helping and doing things.
Yes.
And generational wealth transfer is not the same as you buying a house for your child. I think that's the biggest waste of money you can do. Give things to your children. Why? I'll explain why now. If you give this pen to your child, they might lose that pen. That pen can be taken from them by a partner or by a court, whoever. However, if you give your child access to that pen, it can't be denied to them by anybody. And people confuse giving to rather than giving access to. And that's the mindset change we need to get into. Rather than give things to people, give them access to it. The only thing you should give to your children is education, because they can't lose that and it can't be stolen. Other items, they should be given access to it, because it might go in a divorce court, mightn't it? If you've been in a divorce court, that house you left your son, and in a divorce case, half goes to the wife, or the house you give to your daughter and half goes to their son. Yep. So do think about how we transfer assets down the line. Yeah, it's a way of how you give things out in a tax efficient and safeguarded manner as well too. I'm thinking about. So generational wealth is that which you pass on through legacy planning in that safe space.
That's very interesting what you just said, David, and that helps me with a conundrum I've always had, because, you know, I've always wondered why super rich people like Warren Buffett and Bill Gates and all of those have always said they're not leaving anything to their children. They would not leave any money to their children. And I thought, what a mean thing to do, not leaving children. And then I think to myself, well, maybe because your children got so much money anyway, so maybe that's why you don't do it. But that's a very interesting explanation about access, because of course they know more than I do, don't they? And they know why they're doing it that way. Very interesting.
Because their children have access to their wealth.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is quite different.
Yeah.
Because often they don't tell you the full story. And we think, oh, that's dreadful, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the way our mindset works.
Warren Buffett's a really mean guy. I was thought, how mean? Why don't you leave nothing to your children? That's really horrible. But yeah, really, really interesting. Really interesting. Any questions, Marcia, from that?
Yes. Well, there's a few other questions. Somebody has asked, who would, if you build a financial team, who would you have in it?
Right. Financial team should have at least 4 players. Your accountant, your financial advisor, and your solicitor. You may also include in a financial team either an estate planner if your accountant or financial advisor don't do estate planning, or think about having someone like involved in real estate for property and so forth. But the principal people you have is accountant, your financial advisor, and your solicitor. Those 3 beyond a reason, those are core. Then you can build onto that either an estate planner, if the other don't do estate planning, or alternatively, someone in property, real estate, your surveyor or property person in that case. Not your estate agent. They're not a property person. Yep. Yeah, too much someone who has recognizable qualification, like a RICS valuer and so forth. People get confused between valuation and property estate agents. They're different things, different people.
Okay. And another question was, who would somebody approach if they wanted to set up a trust?
Again, I think the trust argument element, you would speak to your professional team, and within that, you'll be helped by your accountant and your lawyer and or your financial advisor. Yep.
Okay.
What's important, Marcy, is that when you go through the journey of life, although you're going by yourself, okay, you need to have protection, and you need to make sure you have a solid team ahead of you. So when there's bullets being fired, they miss you and they take out your front people, you know, like an army. So, and that's why I talk about having a team, a solid team around you for your protection.
If you take out, and somebody else has asked, Grace, if you take equity out of property to give to the family, what happens at death?
Right. It depends upon how much you take out, how much of what you take out goes to the family, and also as well too, how long between it going to the family and you surviving or you dying. So there's quite a few issues here. How much you're taking out, yeah, how much you're giving to the family, and how long do you survive? Ideally, you want to survive at least 7 years, or probably 14 years, because of the double 7-year window and so forth as well too. People know about the 7-year window because it's all over Google and whatever and so forth. But also be careful there. There's sometimes a 14-year window which people aren't aware of because of previous gifts you give out there as well too. Okay. And also, whilst on the subject, was there any other gifts previously as well too you think about?
Okay. Couple other questions. Mara's got a question for you, David, which is, do you know about Finance Unlocked?
Nope, I don't. Not at the moment.
Okay. Okay. Somebody else has asked another question about trust, but I think I'll leave that leave that one. And somebody, last one, which is if the question is from Sharon, which is, if not the accountant, if you don't have an accountant, please give a few examples of who else you could include in her professional team. And somebody else has asked, can a financial team member include a broker?
Right. First of all, okay, if you haven't got an accountant, okay, you can get an accountant. I mean, would you do brain surgery for your mum without a brain surgeon? Is my question to that question. So you can find an accountant. If you want to, you can. If you don't, you won't. A financial broker, it depends on the financial broker concern. If they are doing all kind of finances, probably not. You want them to do specific about the estate. So you need to look and see what's your aspiration, dreams, hopes, and desires, and choose your team who can fit in with where you're trying to go. Yeah, and what you're trying to do. Yeah, it's like choosing the right sat nav for your journey. That's what we're talking about.
Okay. Somebody has, I'll just add this one last question, Elaine.
Yes.
If somebody has asked Grace, which is, how can I protect a property valued over £500,000?
2 options really. Either speak to me tomorrow or speak to your internal or your financial team who would help advise you, your financial advisor and your accountant. Yeah, I mean, once you have those kind of properties, I assume you are starting down the road beyond financial planning. You're now onto estate planning for the current generation before you move on to legacy planning for future generations as well too. So I don't see why you don't have that in your pocket at all. So you need to have a professional member of your team around you for that kind of advice.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marcia. So my next question to you, David, is this. When you were speaking in your main presentation, you said that legacy planning is a lifetime process.
Yeah.
It takes time.
Mm-hmm.
So when should someone start the process and how long does it take? I mean, if you're reaching retirement, say, for instance, but you do have assets, but you haven't actually started the process of legacy planning, is it too late? I mean, when should you start?
It's not too late, but your options might be slightly reduced or might be more costly in that respect. So I would say, ideally, you want to start thinking about legacy planning as part of your life cycle changes. So you might start around mid-30s, early 40s, start thinking ahead. Give an example. There's a chap I spoke to about a few months ago, and I loved him. He has no children, but he started to plan for when he has children, and I like that. Yeah, the reason I like that, people say to me, "Oh, black fathers are a waste of space," etc., and so forth. But there we had a young black male without a child yet, but begin to plan for his children's future. So I would say late 30s, early 40s, start planning. Coming it to 50s and 60s, okay, this challenges you have there might be care home fees and the challenges there. So you need to start thinking how you can actually, build up your assets, because before you can legacy plan, you must, of course, have acquired assets. Yeah. So spent your first part of your life acquiring your assets and portfolio. Then the later part of it, start planning how you're going to distribute it. Because as I keep telling people, when you go in that ground, okay, or wherever you go, it doesn't go with you. Because when I go to funerals, I like to look into the hole in the ground, and often I see there's no house in there, there's no car in there, and there's no notes in there. So it tells me, okay, if you haven't planned a legacy in advance, okay, you've got a problem now. You're not here anymore. Yep. So it's about starting pretty early in the game, but it's never too late. It just changes the options available to you. They might be a bit more costly, but you still have options.
Lovely. So any other questions around this?
Yeah, one other question, which is from Marcia B. She's planning to buy a home with her partner with an intention for his children to live with them. But in light of this evening's presentation, how should this ownership be done from the beginning, from a legacy planning perspective, to allow the kids and my nephew/nieces to benefit?
Well, I think anybody buying a house in 2021, okay, if it's more than one purchaser, okay, you shouldn't buy that house as joint tenants. And the reason why, if you buy a house as joint tenants, all that means is surviving party takes all, and therefore you have no control over your share of that property, because if you're both joint tenants, you both own 100%, and therefore when you disappear or die off, the survivor takes all. And if nothing else you want to start thinking about this evening is, if you have joint property and you're moving into blended families, as we are nowadays, you should at least own that property as joint tenants in common, not joint tenants, tenants in common. There's a fundamental difference in how you can distribute what is yours. If you own it tenants in common, you have a particular share of that property. If you own it as joint tenants, you own 100%. So by de facto, when you go, the rest of it goes to the surviving party, and you can't bequeath any share of that to anybody at all. I hope that helps you, Marcia.
So can I just ask a follow-up to that?
Yeah.
David,
I won't answer it, but you can ask it.
So, joint tenants in common.
Tenants in common, yeah.
Right. So it's a joint mortgage. You'd have a joint mortgage, would you? You'd have a mortgage.
Yeah.
How does the split work then for joint tenants in common? Is that 50-50?
Right, two things here.
Yeah.
The mortgage and the ownership are quite different. The mortgage is a noose you have around your neck. That's the debt you have to a finance company.
Yeah.
The ownership is owning of the property. So the default position as tenants in common is 50-50. But it need not be 50-50. It can be 60-40. Okay.
So who decides that then? Who decides? I mean,
yourself and your corona.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're putting in 60,000 and they're putting 40,000 pounds,
right, okay.
why should it be 50-50? I know most people are in love and they're airy fairy and so forth, but things do break down.
Because what's yours is mine, and what's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine.
And what's not belongs to me as the advisor.
This is so important, isn't it? Really, to understand this about this thing about tenants in common and how much you've put in,
especially Elaine, with blended families.
Yes.
Because if, let's say, you and I get married, you were that lucky and so forth, and my 14 kids from my 5 previous marriages and so forth, and you and me now have 10 children. Well, we're really busy, aren't we? Yep. And I pass away, and you and I bought a house as joint tenants.
Yes.
You have no obligation to my previous 14 children at all. The house is yours.
That's right.
Yeah. More fool me. Yeah. So that's the sort of thing we're talking about nowadays. Whilst it might seem jovial and funny and so forth, it's really serious stuff we see every day. I see every day the fallout of it.
Yes. Yes, of course we do. And of course, that's how children become disinherited in that sense. People
and how things happen.
Yeah.
I mean, that led to a killing in Jamaica a few months ago. A man got so distraught, that his mum's house didn't get to down the line and so forth. He killed the said lady in the church.
Wow.
So it's worth thinking about.
It's desperate, really. It's desperate.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions, Marcia? So should we move on to the final question that I've got?
No other question.
Okay, lovely. So this is the final one, David, from me. So this has been a really, really important discussion and conversation. I've learned so much of it. Can you tell us, by rounding up, and tell us what are the long-term consequences of not undertaking legacy planning?
Struggle, poverty, catching up. I mean, our community epitomizes that.
Yes.
Because for most of us, we don't have or didn't have a legacy. We're having to build and survive. Yep.
Yeah.
And learn as we go along. And therefore, we're starting from another disadvantage, lack of.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think a colleague of mine said, when he was at school, his friend had said to him about his trust fund. And his friend thought everybody had a trust fund. And my friend said, trust fund? Not at all. The only trust he knows was paying the man on trust every week when he comes around to the house and so forth. Yeah. So the consequence is that you don't get things passed on to you, and you're having to start to rebuild or start to plan from ground zero every time. Yeah. And it can mean a gap widening between groups in society, and sometimes, and at some stage, the gap will be so wide, there will be no catching up.
Yeah.
And that's why I tell people there's people inside there's 3 groups: the haves, the have-nots, and the never will haves. It's quite sad, if you walk around society, all societies, you're seeing that sad state of being. As we were saying this evening, we've seen people on Earth going to the moon. Well, that's great, but there's people on Earth still starving, hungry, and homeless, and we're going to the moon, yeah, because of excess.
Yes.
So it's about thinking about starting now. The best time to start was yesterday. The next best time to start is now, not tomorrow. Now, nothing else. Ask yourselves, after this evening, what will I do different in the morning first thing? Okay. Marcia B, I know, will do something different. She's said so in the chat. But ask yourself, what will you do different to start your journey on legacy planning, beginning with financial planning, estate planning, and the mature set of legacy planning?
Thank you, David. Marcia, do we have any questions? I think I did say one or two.
Yeah, just one last question. When you put your assets in, this is from Christabel, when you put your assets into a trust, do you still have access to make changes if you change your mind?
You do have access to change your mind, but you don't have access to use them as you want to because you've given it away. And that's important. And I dare say that springs to mind a common misunderstanding and bad advice that's been touted around to people. Give your house to your children. What a load of rubbish. Okay? Where will you live? What they chuck you out. You fall out and so forth. Okay? Also, if you're still living there, what about gifts with reservation and so forth? Yeah. Ask yourselves, before you give things away, will you need it? Because once you give it away, it's gone. You can't claw it back. So do think once, not twice, but thrice about doing things.
Yes.
And especially, I don't see why people give their house to their children, their soul house, because I've seen many sad stories about what's happening because it seems a fashionable thing in the UK at the moment to abuse the elderly and our seniors for their assets.
Absolutely. I've heard some sad news, some sad stories about exactly that. And it wasn't the children that created the problem with the parent, but the children's partners.
Yeah.
Like that, yeah, definitely. I've seen that. Any other questions, Marcia?
Someone's asked, one question is, after the last part of the course next week, will the recordings be shared?
I can answer that. They'll be on YouTube. They'll be on our YouTube channel, all of them. So when it's all done, we'll edit. And when I say edit, I don't mean take out really any substantial part of the content, just top and tail it. And they'll be on YouTube, PCU YouTube channel. Go to YouTube and type in Pentecostal Credit Union. Actually, we've got about 90 videos on there already about our work and the U Shadow Board. So if you want to see us, you can go onto our YouTube channel and see it. And these will definitely be the series of 4 from this session.
Okay, and last question that's on here is making a will part of legacy planning?
Yes, it is. It's a key and fundamental part of legacy planning, because if there's no will in place, there's no plan being executed at all. And I think I said earlier on, okay, lots of people tell me, Dave, we can't make a will. That will mean we're gonna die and so forth. If that's the case, get it out of your heads. Yeah, you're not ready for legacy planning yet, because a fundamental component of legacy planning is having a will, writing things down. I'm not sure why people are always afraid to write things down or document things.
Anything else, Marcia?
Will there be any more 4-part sessions like this before the end of the year?
Well, we've still got to talk about it. This is the first time we've done it. And actually I have to say, we've been so encouraged by the support and the interest and people coming Actually, I think we'd be mad not to do it again. What we will do, though, probably is we might have different topics. We might run the most popular topics, but I think we might have different ones. So, for instance, already I'm really keen on doing inheritance tax. What do you think, David? That we do a session on inheritance tax, just a whole session on inheritance tax.
Yeah, I'll listen to that one for you. Yeah, I'll listen to that.
So the short answer is yes. Yes, we will. Yeah. Cryptocurrencies, perhaps. Don't know about that. So I think that's it. Is that it? That's it? Is that the last? Any other questions?
No other questions.
That's it. Lovely. And we are at 8 o'clock now. So just a couple of words from us before we go. Thank you all again for joining us, and those that keep coming back. It's wonderful. We have one more session next week. And David again is going to be leading the session next week on financial planning. He mentioned the importance of financial planning to the whole kind of picture of legacy planning. So the focus will be financial planning and budgeting next week. And I just want to encourage those of you who don't know about the Pentecostal Credit Union to go onto our website, www.pcuuk.com. I will finish it in the chat, and just have a look at us, and you can call us if you have any want to ask any questions. 0208 673 2542. I just want to say one thing about the MoneyWise programs, the financial capability programs that we run. Yes, we do run financial capability workshops. We are accredited to do that. We've been trained to do that by the financial standards, financial education body. Can't remember the names now, but we've all been certificated to run them. We actually tend to run these workshops in churches. That's what we tend to do. We do them for our members too, but most of the time, if churches ask us and request them, we will run these workshops, and they are absolutely free for our Common Bond or Pentecostal churches. So thank you all again for coming, and I really hope to see you next week when we'll be talking about financial planning. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Have a good evening. Bye-bye.